The morning sun barely broke through the gray Washington clouds when I found the notice taped to my front door. It was a crisp, official-looking envelope from the Pineview Heights Homeowners Association, accusing me of unauthorized land use and demanding a $4,000 fine for environmental disruption. I stood on my porch, coffee mug in hand, staring at the letter in disbelief. My name's Ethan Carter, a 42-year-old data analyst who moved to this quiet suburb to escape the chaos of Portland's tech scene. I'd bought this house in Pineview Heights for its promise of solitude, a half-acre lot backing onto a sprawling forest that seemed perfect for my love of hiking and occasional bow hunting. The fine, though. That was about a deer I'd taken down last weekend on land I thought was public. Turns out, I was wrong, but so was the HOA, and that mistake was about to unravel their entire operation. Pineview Heights was a postcard suburb, all manicured lawns and modern two-story homes nestled against a dense woodland in western Washington. The HOA fees were a steep $500 quarterly, but the real estate agent had sold me on the exclusive community trails and pristine landscaping. What she didn't mention was the HOA president, Margaret Walsh, a 45-year-old corporate attorney with a penchant for power and a clipboard she wielded like a scepter. Margaret ran Pineview like her personal fiefdom, her monthly meetings more about enforcing her vision than fostering community. I'd kept my head down since moving in 6 months ago, mowing my lawn to the exact 2.5-inch height specified in the bylaws and paying my dues on time. But this fine. This was war. The trouble started 2 weeks ago when I'd ventured into the woods behind my property, a 60-acre tract of pine and cedar crisscrossed by well-worn trails. I'd assumed it was state land, open for hunting with a proper license, which I had. My grandfather had taught me archery in rural Oregon, and I found peace in the quiet focus of tracking game. That Saturday, I'd bagged a 4-point buck with a clean shot, field-dressed it, and was hauling it back when I ran into Margaret and her morning walking group, 6 women in matching yoga gear, clutching reusable water bottles. Margaret's eyes widened in horror when she saw the deer slung over my shoulder. "What are you doing?" she'd gasped, her voice sharp enough to startle birds from the trees. "This is a community sanctuary. You can't just kill things here." I tried to explain I had a hunting license and thought the land was public, but she wasn't listening. She was already snapping photos with her phone, muttering about community standards and environmental vandalism. Her posse nodded in agreement, one of them, Lisa Grayson, a 38-year-old realtor who lived 3 houses down, whispering loudly about how this would tank property values. I went home, brushed it off as a misunderstanding, and figured I'd clear it up later. Then came the find that I called my neighbor, Tom Rivera, a 50-year-old electrician who'd lived in Pineview for a decade and seemed to know the neighborhood's pulse. "Margaret's been using those woods for years," he told me over the phone, his voice low like he was sharing state secrets. "She calls them the Pineview Trails, markets them to new buyers as a perk. Problem is, I don't think she's ever checked who actually owns the land." That got my attention. If the HOA was fining me for hunting on land they didn't control, they were overstepping, big time. The next day, I headed to the county records office to dig into the property's history. After an hour of sifting through deeds and maps, I found the owner, Clara Henshaw, a 78-year-old widow living in Arizona who'd inherited the land from her late husband. The 60 acres had been in her family for generations, originally part of a logging operation. I tracked down her contact info through a public records search and sent her an email, explaining the situation and asking if I'd violated any rules by hunting there. To my surprise, she called me the next morning. "Ethan, is it?" she said, her voice warm but tired. "That land's been mine for 40 years. I haven't set foot on it since my husband passed, but I pay the taxes. Nobody asked me about trails or hunting, but if you want to use it, I'm fine with that. Just don't trash the place." I thanked her and casually asked if she'd ever considered selling. "Funny you mention it," she said. "I've been thinking about letting it go. Medical bills, you know. I'd take $600,000, maybe less if it's a clean deal." My mind raced. I had savings from my tech job and a small inheritance from my parents, enough to make a move if I played it smart. But first, I needed to deal with the HOA. The HOA meeting was the following evening, held in the community center's sterile conference room. Margaret presided at the head of a long table, flanked by her vice president, Greg Holt, a 47-year-old bank manager who nodded at her every word, and the treasurer, Diane Patel, a 52-year-old accountant who looked perpetually exhausted. The room was packed, 30 neighbors, some curious, others glaring at me like I'd personally offended them. Margaret opened with her usual spiel about upholding Pineview's values, then zeroed in on me. "Mr. Carter," she said, her smile tight, "perhaps you'd like to explain why you felt it appropriate to slaughter wildlife in our community's nature preserve." I stood, holding a folder of documents I'd prepared. "Happy to clarify," I said, keeping my tone even. I was hunting legally with a valid license on private land owned by Clara Henshaw, who gave me explicit permission. That land isn't part of Pineview Heights, and the HOA has no authority to fine me for activities outside its jurisdiction. I slid copies of my license and Clara's email across the table. "Also, I've learned the HOA has been using this land for trails without the owner's consent. That's a problem." The room went quiet. Diane picked up the documents, scanning them with a frown. "He's right about the property lines," she said cautiously. "If it's not HOA land, we can't enforce fines there." Margaret's face tightened. "That's irrelevant," she snapped. "Those trails are a community resource. We've maintained them for years, and residents expect access. Hunting endangers everyone." Greg chimed in, "Firearms near our homes are a safety issue, plain and simple." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others whispering about that hunter guy. Lisa Grayson stood, clutching her pearls, metaphorically, at least, and said, "I'm scared to walk those trails now, knowing someone's out there with a bow." I tried to explain that hunting season was short and I followed strict safety protocols, but Margaret shut me down. "This isn't just about laws, Ethan. It's about our community's ethos." She called in Officer Rachel Kim, a 40-year-old cop who lived in Pineview. Rachel reviewed my license and confirmed I'd broken no laws. "If he has the owner's permission, there's no issue," she said. "This is a civil matter, not criminal." Margaret wasn't fazed. "The fine stands," she declared. "Pay within 30 days, or we'll pursue legal action, including a lien on your property." That night, I dug deeper. A neighbor, Jenny Chen, a 33-year-old graphic designer who'd always been friendly, slipped me a flyer she'd found at the community center. It advertised the Pineview Nature Preserve, complete with a map of Clara's land and plans for a Margaret Walsh Legacy Park. The HOA had filed permits for walking paths, a picnic area, and a sign bearing Margaret's name. They'd raised $50,000 through fundraisers, all for a project on land they didn't own. The gall was staggering. I contacted Laura Bennett, a 44-year-old real estate lawyer I'd worked with on a previous project. She reviewed the documents and laughed. "They're trying to claim adverse possession, but they're nowhere close," she said. "In Washington, they'd need 10 years of open, notorious use and to pay the property taxes. Clara's been covering those. This is a massive overreach." When I mentioned I was considering buying the land, Laura grinned. "That's one way to shut this down. I'll make sure the deal's airtight." Over the next week, the HOA's campaign against me intensified. My mailbox was vandalized, anonymous notes called me a forest butcher, and neighbors I chatted with at the grocery store started avoiding me. Jenny told me Margaret was rallying homeowners, warning them I was a threat to Pineview's harmony. Meanwhile, I negotiated with Clara. She agreed to $550,000, a steal for 60 acres, and Laura handled the paperwork. I used my savings and took a small loan to cover the rest, finalizing the purchase in 10 days. The day after the deed was signed, Margaret showed up at my door with Greg, holding a new notice, this time, a lawsuit threat for $5,500, including late fees. Last chance, Ethan, she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Pay up, or we'll see you in court. I invited them in, slid the deed across the table, and watched their faces collapse. As of yesterday, I own the 60 acres you've been calling your nature preserve, I said. You've been trespassing for years, building trails and planning a park without permission. I'd like you to remove your benches and signs by next week, or I'll be the one filing a lawsuit. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. Greg stammered, this can't be legal. I smiled. It's very legal. Talk to your lawyer. They left in stunned silence, and by the next HOA meeting, the Pineview Nature Preserve was off the agenda. Margaret resigned a month later, citing personal reasons. I kept the land open for neighbors to hike, with Clara's blessing, but the HOA never tried to claim it again. Sometimes, the best way to fight a bully is to own the battlefield.